They were laughing in the boardroom when they voted to fire me. What they didn't know was that I owned 70% of the company they were trying to steal. My name is Marcus Chen, and this is the story of how I watched them plan my own destruction while holding all the cards. 3 months earlier, I was sitting in my small office on the 3rd floor when I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. The conference room next door had thin walls and someone had forgotten to close the door completely. I recognized the voices immediately. David Harrison, our Chief Operating Officer, Jennifer Matthews from Finance, and Robert Kane, the company's lead investor. They were discussing me, and the conversation made my blood run cold. David's voice came through crystal clear. He said I was becoming a liability. Too idealistic, he called me. To focus on the employees and not enough on profit margins. Jennifer agreed, saying my reluctance to cut costs was hurting their quarterly projections. But it was Robert's words that hit hardest. He said I was soft and that soft founders don't survive in this business. They needed someone ruthless at the helm. They needed me gone. I sat frozen in my chair, processing what I'd just heard. These were people I trusted. David had been with me since the beginning when we were operating out of my garage. Jennifer I personally recruited from a failing startup because I believed in her talent. And Robert, he'd been my mentor, the man who taught me everything about running a business. Now they were plotting to remove me from the company I'd built from nothing. But here's what they didn't know. 6 years ago, when we first incorporated, I had made a decision that seemed paranoid at the time. My lawyer had advised me to retain majority ownership no matter how many investment rounds we went through. I'd structured every deal, every stock option, every share distribution to ensure I always maintained control. On paper, through various holding companies and trusts, I owned 70% of the voting shares. David had 12%. Jennifer had 3%. Robert's fund owned 10%, and the rest was distributed among employees and smaller investors. I'd never told anyone the full picture. Most people assumed the ownership was more evenly distributed. I let them believe it because I never wanted to rule through authority. I wanted to lead through respect and collaboration. Now the decision was about to save everything I built. Over the next few weeks, I played along. I attended meetings. I smiled. I pretended everything was normal. But I was watching and listening. The conspiracy was bigger than I had thought. They'd been planning this for months. David had already identified my replacement, a corporate shark named Thomas Wright, who recently gutted 3 companies for profit. Jennifer had prepared financial documents that painted me as incompetent, showing cherry-picked data. That made my decisions look reckless. Robert was lining up board support, convincing other investors that change was necessary for growth. They scheduled an emergency board meeting for the first Monday in October. The agenda listed it as a discussion about company direction, but I knew what it really was. It was going to be my execution. David sent me the calendar invite with a casual email saying we needed to align on strategy. I accepted the meeting without comment. The weekend before the board meeting, I couldn't sleep. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately to stop this before it went any further. But another part of me wanted to see how far they'd go. I wanted to know who my real allies were and who would stand by silently while they destroyed me. I decided to let them play their hand completely. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. I dressed carefully that day. Navy suit, red tie, the armor of business warfare. I arrived at the office early and went straight to the boardroom. The table was already set with leather portfolios at each seat. I picked one up and flipped through it. Inside was a 40-page document titled Restructuring Proposal for Optimal Growth. It was their roadmap for removing me, and it was thorough. They'd thought of everything. The board members started arriving at 9. David came in first, looking confident, almost smug. He shook my hand and asked how my weekend was. I told him it was enlightening. Jennifer arrived next, carrying additional copies of financial reports. She avoided eye contact. Robert came in surrounded by his usual entourage of analysts and assistants. He clapped me on the shoulder and said today would be a pivotal day for the company. I agreed with him completely. At 9:15, everyone was seated, 12 board members in total. David called the meeting to order and immediately asked for the floor. He began his presentation with slides about market conditions and competitive pressures. Then he pivoted. He said the company needed bold leadership to reach the next level. He said sentiment wasn't strategy and compassion wasn't a business model. He said difficult decisions required difficult leadership, and he questioned whether I possessed the quality. Jennifer went next with her financial presentation. She showed charts where my initiatives had cost money. She highlighted every program I'd championed that prioritized people over immediate profit: the employee wellness program, the profit-sharing system, the investment in workplace safety that exceeded regulatory requirements. She made compassion look like weakness and humanity look like waste. Then Robert stood up. He spoke about his decades of experience, about the patterns he'd seen in companies that failed. He said founders often couldn't scale with their companies. He said there was no shame in stepping aside, but there was tragedy in holding on too long. He said he'd seen me becoming an obstacle to growth and that the board had a fiduciary duty to act. Then he made the motion. He proposed my immediate removal as CEO, with Thomas Wright named as interim replacement, effective immediately. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment. Several board members looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up. They were going to let this happen. David seconded the motion with barely concealed satisfaction. Robert asked if there was any discussion before the vote. I raised my hand and stood up slowly. I thanked them for their presentation. I said it was thorough and clearly took a lot of work. I acknowledged that they'd raised some valid points about the challenges facing the company. Then I smiled and said I appreciated their concern, but I wouldn't be stepping down today or any day. The confused look started immediately. David interrupted, saying this wasn't a discussion, it was a vote, and my opinion didn't matter. The board would decide. I nodded and said he was absolutely right. The board would decide. So let's vote. I asked for a show of hands for those in favor of removing me. David's hand shot up. Jennifer raised hers reluctantly. Robert raised his with theatrical certainty. To other investors Robert had recruited raised their hands. 5 votes total out of 12 board members. Then I called for the votes against my removal. 3 independent board members raised their hands, people I had brought on for their integrity and expertise. That made 3 votes against. I waited. The math didn't add up yet. David looked confused then triumphant. He said the abstentions would be counted as affirmative per the bylaws. He thought he'd won. Then I raised my hand. I voted against my own removal. David laughed and said my vote counted the same as everyone else's. 1 person, 1 vote. That's when I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside were the corporate documents, the shareholder agreements, the trust structures that everyone had signed, but apparently never fully read. I distributed copies around the table and gave everyone a moment to look through them. I explained that while board seats were distributed evenly, voting power was not. Every share of the company carried voting rights, and those rights extended to all corporate decisions, including board votes. According to the operating agreement, we all signed any vote regarding leadership changes or fundamental business direction required a shareholder vote, not just a board vote. And I own 70% of the voting shares. The color drained from David's face. Jennifer started frantically flipping through the documents looking for a loophole. Robert sat frozen, his legendary composure shattered. I let the silence hang for a moment, then continued. I said their vote had been recorded: 5 in favor, 3 against. And by my count, representing 70% of the shares, I voted no. The motion failed. But I wasn't done. I learned a lot over the past few months. I learned who could be trusted and who couldn't. I learned that loyalty mattered and betrayal had consequences. I called for a new motion. I moved to remove David Harrison, Jennifer Matthews, and Robert Kane from all positions of authority within the company, effective immediately. I cited breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy to undermine company leadership, and violation of their employment agreements, which included non-compete and loyalty clauses. The 3 of them erupted. David called it a coup. Jennifer said I couldn't do this. Robert threatened lawsuits. I let them finish, then explained they could challenge my decision in court, but it would be expensive and time-consuming, and they would lose. Every conversation they'd had, every email they'd sent, every document they prepared was discoverable. Did they really want their conspiracy exposed in public filings? Did they want the business community to know they tried and failed to overthrow a founder? Who outmaneuvered them? Security escorted them out 20 minutes later. David refused to make eye contact as he left. Jennifer was crying. Robert stopped at the door and told me I'd just made the biggest mistake of my career. I told him the biggest mistake would have been trusting him in the first place. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. I addressed them calmly. I said this company was built on values that matter. We take care of our people. We prioritize sustainable growth over quarterly gains. We believe that doing right by employees creates long-term value. Anyone who couldn't support that vision was welcome to sell their shares. I buy them out at fair market value. No one moved. The meeting adjourned. The next day I called an all-hands meeting. Rumors were already spreading and I needed to control the narrative. I stood in front of 300 employees and told them the truth. I explained that some leaders had tried to take the company in a direction that betrayed our values. I explained that those leaders were gone, and I promised that as long as I had breath in my body, this company would never lose sight of what made us different. We would succeed because of our humanity, not in spite of it. The applause lasted 5 minutes. 3 months have passed since that October morning. Thomas Wright never got his CEO position. David started a consulting firm that failed within 6 weeks. Jennifer took a job at a hedge fund. Robert quietly retired from active investing. Meanwhile, our company just closed our best quarter in history. Turns out when you treat people like they matter, they pour their hearts into their work. Revenue is up 40%. Employee satisfaction scores hit all-time highs. We're hiring, not firing. I learned something profound through this experience. Power isn't about control or authority. Real power comes from building something so valuable, so meaningful that people will fight to protect it. I had the shares, but that's not what saved the company. What saved us was a foundation built on trust and values that people believed in. The ownership gave me the legal authority, but it was the culture that gave me the moral authority. Together they were unbeatable. Last week I restructured my ownership. I placed 30% of my shares into an employee trust that vests over time. I'll still maintain control, but now hundreds of people have a real stake in what we're building. They're not just employees anymore. They're owners. And no one will ever take this from them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so successful, so enduring that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. They tried to write me out of my own story. Instead, they wrote themselves out of a legacy that will outlast us all. The company they tried to steal is now worth 10 times what it was when they made their move. Their shares would have made them wealthy. Now they have nothing but regrets. If someone you trusted tried to destroy everything you built, would you have seen it coming or would you have been blindsided? What would you do in my place? Comment below.